Ptolemy VIII Physcon, Ptolemy VIII Euergetes II Tryphon Greek, Ptolemaïos Euergétēs Tryphon, Ptolemaïos Euergétēs Tryphon Ptolemy the Benefactor, the luxurious c. 184 BC 28 June 116 BC, nicknamed Physcon Fuscon Fatty, was a king of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. He was the younger son of Ptolemy V Epiphanes and Cleopatra I Syra. His reign was characterized by fierce political and military conflict with his older brother Ptolemy VI Philometor and his sister Cleopatra II. Ptolemy VIII was originally made co-ruler with his older siblings in the run-up to the Sixth Syrian War. In the course of that war, Ptolemy VI was captured and Ptolemy VIII became sole king of Egypt. When the war ended and Ptolemy VI was restored to the throne in 168 BC, the two brothers continued to quarrel. In 164 BC, Ptolemy VIII drove out his brother and became sole king of the Ptolemaic Empire, but he was expelled in turn in 163 BC. As a result of Roman intervention, Ptolemy VIII was awarded control of Cyrenaica. From there he repeatedly tried to capture Cyprus, which had also been promised to him by the Romans from his brother. After Ptolemy VI's death in 145 BC, Ptolemy VIII returned to Egypt as co-ruler with his sister. His cruel treatment of opposition and his decision to marry his niece Cleopatra III and promote her to the status of co-regent led to a civil war from 132 to 126 BC, in which Cleopatra II controlled Alexandria and enjoyed the support of the Greek population of the country, while Ptolemy VIII and Cleopatra III controlled most of the rest of Egypt and were supported by the native Egyptians. During this war, native Egyptians were promoted to the highest echelons of the Ptolemaic government for the first time. Ptolemy was victorious and ruled alongside Cleopatra II and Cleopatra III until his death in 116 BC. The ancient Greek sources on Ptolemy VIII are extremely hostile, characterizing him as cruel and mocking him as fat and degenerate, as part of a contrast with Ptolemy VI, whom they present extremely positively. The historian Gunther Hobel calls him one of the most brutal, and at the same time one of the shrewdest politicians of the Hellenistic age. Background and early life. Ptolemy was the younger son of Ptolemy V Epiphanes, who reigned from 204 to 180 BC. Ptolemy V's reign had been dominated by the Fifth Syrian War 204–198 BC, in which the Ptolemaic realm fought against the Seleucid king Antiochus III, who ruled the Near East and Asia Minor. In that war, Antiochus III had completely defeated the Ptolemaic forces, had annexed Syria and Judea to his empire, and reduced Egypt to a subordinate position. The new situation was solidified with a peace treaty, in which Ptolemy V married Antiochus' daughter Cleopatra I in 194 BC. Ptolemy VI Philometor was the eldest son of the couple, born in 186 BC, and was the heir to the throne from birth. The exact date of Ptolemy VIII's birth is unknown, but it was probably around 184 BC. He also had an elder sister, Cleopatra II, who was probably born between 186 and 184 BC. The defeat in the Fifth Syrian War cast a shadow over the rest of Ptolemy V's reign. One prominent faction within the Ptolemaic court agitated for a return to war in order to restore Egyptian prestige, while another faction resisted the expense involved in rebuilding and remilitarizing the realm. When Ptolemy V died unexpectedly in September 180 BC, at the age of only 30, he was succeeded by Ptolemy VI. Since the new king was only 6 years old, Actual power rested with the regents first Cleopatra I 180-178/7 BC and then Iulius and Lennius 178/7 170 BC. These regents were more closely associated with the peaceful faction and, as a result, members of the Warhawk faction seem to have begun to look to the young Ptolemy VIII as a potential figurehead for their movement. First reign 170-163 BC. Accession and the Sixth Syrian War 170-168 BC. The Seleucid king Seleucus Roman IV, who had followed a generally peaceful policy, was murdered in 175 BC, and after 2 months of conflict, his brother Antiochus Roman IV Epiphanes secured the throne. The unsettled situation empowered the Warhawks in the Ptolemaic court, and Iulius and Lennius made efforts to conciliate them. By 172 BC, they seem to have embraced the Warhawks' position. In October 170 BC, Ptolemy VIII, now about 16, was promoted to the status of co-regent and incorporated into the Ptolemaic dynastic cult as one of the Philometor's mother-loving gods alongside his brother and sister, who had now been married to one another. The current year was declared the first year of a new era. John Granger argues that these ceremonies were intended to paper over the factional differences that had developed in the court and to promote unity in the run-up to war. Ptolemy VI remained the senior king, as demonstrated later in 170 BC by the declaration of Ptolemy VI adulthood and the celebration of his coming-of-age ceremony, the Anacleteria, marking the formal end of the regency government. In practice, however, the regents Iulius and Lennius remained in charge of the government. The Sixth Syrian War broke out shortly after this, probably in early 169 BC. Ptolemy VIII probably remained in Alexandria, while the Ptolemaic army set out from the border fort of Pelusium to invade Palestine. The Ptolemaic army was intercepted and decimated by Antiochus Roman IV's army in the Sinai. The defeated army withdrew to the Nile Delta, while Antiochus seized Pelusium and then moved on the delta. As a result of this defeat, Iulius and Lennius were toppled by a military coup and replaced with 2 prominent Ptolemaic generals, Commanus and Cineas. As Antiochus advanced on Alexandria, Ptolemy VI went out to meet him. They negotiated an agreement of friendship, which in effect reduced Egypt to a Seleucid client state. When news of the agreement reached Alexandria, the people of the city rioted. Commanus and Cineas rejected the agreement, rejected Ptolemy VI authority, and declared Ptolemy VIII the sole king. Cleopatra Roman II's position remained unchanged. Antiochus responded by placing Alexandria under siege, but he was unable to take the city and withdrew from Egypt in September 169 BC, as winter approached, leaving Ptolemy VI as his puppet king in Memphis and retaining a garrison in Pelusium. Within 2 months, Ptolemy VIII and Cleopatra Roman II reconciled with Ptolemy VI, and he returned to Alexandria as their co-regent. The restored government repudiated the agreement that Ptolemy VI had made with Antiochus and began to recruit new troops from Greece. In response, in spring 168 BC, Antiochus invaded Egypt for a second time. Officially, this invasion was justified by the claim that Ptolemy VIII had unjustly appropriated his older brother's authority. Antiochus quickly occupied Memphis and was crowned king of Egypt and advanced on Alexandria. However, the Ptolemies had appealed to Rome for help over the winter, and a Roman embassy led by Gaius Popilius Lenus confronted Antiochus at the town of Eleusis and forced him to agree to a settlement. From joint rule to sole rule 168-163 BC. Initially, the joint rule of the 2 brothers and Cleopatra Roman II, which had been established during the war, continued. But the complete failure of the Egyptian forces in the Sixth Syrian War had left the Ptolemaic monarchy's prestige seriously diminished, and it caused a permanent rift between Ptolemy VI and Ptolemy VIII. In 165 BC, Dionysius Petisarapes, a prominent courtier who appears to have been of native Egyptian origin, attempted to take advantage of the conflict between the brothers in order to take control of the government. He announced to the people of Alexandria that Ptolemy VI had tried to get him to assassinate Ptolemy VIII and tried to whip up a mob to support him. Ptolemy VI managed to convince Ptolemy VIII that the charges were untrue, and the two brothers appeared publicly together in the stadium, diffusing the crisis. Dionysius fled the city and convinced some military contingents to mutiny. Heavy fighting took place in the Fayum over the next year. This and another revolt in the Thebaid, the latest in a series of rebellions that had attempted to overthrow the Ptolemies and re-establish native Egyptian rule. Ptolemy VI successfully suppressed the rebellion after a bitter siege at Panopolis. Late in 164 BC, probably not long after Ptolemy VI had returned from the south, Ptolemy VIII, who was now about 20 years old, somehow expelled Ptolemy VI and Cleopatra II from power. Ptolemy VI fled to Rome and then Cyprus. The exact course of events is not known, but Diodorus Siculus reports that the instigator of the expulsion was a man named Timotheus, who then became the dominant minister. Ptolemy VIII now assumed the epithet Euergetes Benefactor, which recalled his ancestor Ptolemy III Euergetes and distinguished him from Ptolemy VI and Cleopatra II, who both bore the epithet Philometor. Ptolemy VIII is said to have behaved tyrannically, and his minister Timotheus used torture and arbitrary executions to eliminate his enemies. In summer 163 BC, the people of Alexandria rioted against Ptolemy VIII, expelling him in turn and recalling Ptolemy VI. Reign in Cyrenaica 163–145 BC. On his return to power, a pair of Roman agents convinced Ptolemy VI to grant Ptolemy VIII control of Cyrenaica. Ptolemy VIII departed for Cyrene, but he was not satisfied. In late 163 or early 162 BC, he went to Rome to request help. The Senate was convinced that the division was unfair, declaring that Ptolemy VIII ought to receive Cyprus as well. The ancient historian Polybius believed that the Senate made this decision with the conscious goal of weakening Ptolemaic power. Titus Manlius Torquatus and Gnaeus Cornelius Maela were sent as envoys to force Ptolemy VI to concede this. From Rome, Ptolemy VIII went to Greece, where he recruited soldiers in preparation for an expedition to seize Cyprus by force. He had sailed to Rhodes with this fleet when he encountered Torquatus and Maela, who convinced him to discharge his troops and return to Cyrene. He went to the border between Egypt and Cyrene, waiting with a force of 1,000 Cretan mercenaries at a small town just west of Parætonium for the results of the Roman negotiations with Ptolemy VI. Ptolemy VIII had been waiting there for 40 days when Ptolemy Sympathesis, the governor that Ptolemy VIII had left in charge of Cyrene in his absence, Ptolemy marched to suppress the revolt and was defeated in battle. He regained control over Cyrene by the end of 162 BC, but it is not known whether he achieved this by negotiation or military action. However, when Torquatus and Maela arrived in Alexandria, Ptolemy VI successfully put them off until he heard about the revolt, at which point he refused their demands. They had to return to Rome without achieving their goal. In winter 162–61 BC, the Roman Senate responded to this by breaking off relations with Ptolemy VI and to grant Ptolemy VIII permission to use force to take control of Cyprus, but they offered him no tangible support. He launched a military expedition to Cyprus in 161 BC. This expedition lasted up to a year before fierce Cypriot resistance forced him to abandon the enterprise. In 156 or 155 BC, Ptolemy VIII faced a failed assassination attempt, which he attributed to his older brother. Ptolemy VIII went to Rome and displaying the scars he had received in the attempt to the Senate. As a result of the embassy, the Roman Senate agreed to send a second embassy in 154 BC, led by Gnaeus Cornelius Maula and Lucius Minucius Thermus, with an honor guard of troops, in order to enforce the transfer of Cyprus to Ptolemy VIII's control. Ptolemy VIII was besieged by his older brother at Epiphanes and was captured. Ptolemy VIII was persuaded to withdraw from Cyprus in exchange for continued possession of Cyrenaica, an annual payment of grain, and a promise of marriage to one of Ptolemy VI's infant daughters, probably Cleopatra II once she came of age. Relations with Rome. Throughout his time as king in Cyrene, Ptolemy VIII maintained extremely close relations with Rome. From 162 BC, he was an official amicus et socius friend and ally of the Roman Republic. During his time in Rome he is said to have met Cornelia. In 152 BC, after the death of her husband, Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus, Ptolemy VIII allegedly asked for her hand in marriage, which she refused. This encounter was popular in neoclassical art, but it is unlikely that it ever actually took place. Even if untrue, the story may reflect close ties between Ptolemy VIII and the gens Cornelia and Sempronia. By contrast, Ptolemy VI seems to have maintained ties with Cato the Elder. An inscription of 155 BC, set up in the aftermath of the assassination attempt, records Ptolemy VIII's will, in which he bequeaths Cyrenaica to Rome if he died childless. This act is not mentioned by any literary source, but it fits with the very close alignment between Ptolemy VIII and the Romans that is attested in the literary sources. Similar testaments are known from other contemporary monarchs, notably Attalus Roman III of Pergamum. They were often used by monarchs as an attempt to protect themselves from assassination or coup. Ptolemy VIII's will would be the earliest example of this practice. However, L. Criscuolo has argued that the inscription of Ptolemy's will is actually a forgery produced by the Romans after they gained control of Cyrenaica in 96 BC. Spectacle and construction. As king of Cyrene, Ptolemy VIII attempted to display the Hellenistic royal virtue of thrift luxury. The main priesthood in Cyrene was the position of the priest of Apollo. Ptolemy assumed this position and discharged his duties, especially the hosting of feasts, extremely sumptuously. He also engaged in a wide-ranging construction project in the city. A large tomb west of Ptolemais seems to have been intended as his final resting place. Second reign 145–132 BC. Ptolemy VI died on campaign in Syria in 145 BC. Ptolemy VI seems to have intended for his 7-year-old son, also called Ptolemy, to succeed him, but after 3 weeks, the Alexandrians called on Ptolemy VIII to return from Cyrene, assume the kingship, and marry his older sister, Cleopatra II. The royal couple were incorporated into the dynastic cult as the Euergetes benefactor gods, Cleopatra having previously been one of the Philometors with Ptolemy VI. Ptolemy was proclaimed pharaoh in Memphis in 144 or 143 BC. On his return to Alexandria in 145 BC, Ptolemy VIII is reported to have launched a purge of those who had opposed him and supported Ptolemy VI. This purge is luridly described in the literary sources, though it is sometimes difficult to determine whether specific anecdotes belong to this event or his later reconquest of Alexandria in 126 BC. Justin reports that Ptolemy let his soldiers rampage through the streets of Alexandria, murdering indiscriminately, until he was left alone with his soldiers in so large a city, and found himself a king, not of men, but of empty houses. Valerius Maximus says that when the young men of Alexandria took refuge in the gymnasium, Ptolemy set the building on fire. It is probably in this period that Ptolemy gained a number of perforative nicknames, including Physcon Fatty and Euergetes Malefactor, a pun on his official epithet Euergetes Benefactor. Ptolemy's accession also marked the end of Ptolemaic presence in the Aegean Sea. Within months of his accession, he had withdrawn all troops from Etanos, Syra, and Methana, the last remaining Ptolemaic bases in the Aegean. The Ptolemaic Empire was now limited to Egypt, Cyprus, and Cyrene. Ptolemy VIII probably also had the young son of Ptolemy VI and Cleopatra II, who was also called Ptolemy, murdered. According to Justin, Ptolemy VIII did the deed personally on the night of his wedding to Cleopatra in 145 BC, and the boy died in his mother's arms. Documentary evidence from papyri indicates that, in reality, the boy was initially maintained as heir and only removed after the birth of Ptolemy Memphites. By the late 140s BC, Ptolemy Memphites had been promoted to co-regent. Around 140 BC, Ptolemy VIII married his niece Cleopatra III, daughter of Ptolemy VI and Cleopatra II, and made her a co-ruler, without divorcing his older sister, Cleopatra II. According to Livy, Ptolemy VIII had initiated a relationship with her shortly after his accession, which he now made official. Daniel Ogden has argued that the marriage may not have been planned from the outset, but a measure taken to prevent her from being married to someone else who might use that marriage in order to claim the throne. However, the new arrangement led to conflict with Cleopatra II. Apparently, in response to this new marriage and with the support of Cleopatra II, a former Ptolemaic officer called Gallestes initiated a revolt. Gallestes had been a trusted official under Ptolemy VI but had been forced into exile in 145 BC. In Greece, he gathered an army of other Ptolemaic exiles, then announced that he had a young son of Ptolemy VI in his care and crowned this boy as king. Gallestes then invaded Egypt, intending to put this child on the throne. Ptolemy VIII's mercenaries, whose pay was in arrears, nearly defected to the rebellion, but their commander, Hierax, prevented this by paying their wages from his own money. By February 139 BC, Gallestes had been defeated and Ptolemy had issued a decree affirming the rights and privileges of the Egyptian priesthood, in which he represented himself, Cleopatra II, and Cleopatra III as harmoniously ruling together. In the same year, Ptolemy VIII received a Roman embassy, led by Scipio Aemilianus, which was intended to effect a peaceful settlement of all affairs in the eastern Mediterranean. The ancient sources emphasize the sumptuous greeting that the Romans received. By this point, he was apparently enormously fat and was transported everywhere in a litter. Civil War 132–126 BC. In late 132 BC, the conflict between the royal siblings finally erupted into open warfare, with Ptolemy VIII and Cleopatra III on one side opposing Cleopatra II on the other. At first, Ptolemy retained control of Alexandria, but in late 131 BC the people of Alexandria rioted in favor of Cleopatra II and set fire to the royal palace. Ptolemy VIII, Cleopatra III, and their children escaped to Cyprus. Cleopatra II, meanwhile, had herself crowned as sole queen, the first time that a Ptolemaic woman had done this, and assumed the title of the Philometor Sotira, mother-loving, savior goddess, which served to link her to her deceased husband Ptolemy VI Philometor, and to the dynastic founder, Ptolemaeus Euergétēs, although Alexandria had sided with Cleopatra Roman II, and she tended to be supported by Greeks and Jews throughout the country, Ptolemy Roman VIII and Cleopatra Roman III were more popular. Most of Egypt continued to acknowledge Ptolemy Roman VIII as king. In the south of the country, however, a man named Harsesi took advantage of the chaos to rebel, following in the footsteps of the rebellion of Hugranafer and Anchimachis 206–185 BC. Harsesi probably declared himself pharaoh and managed to seize control of Thebes in August or September of 131 BC. He was expelled in November and pursued by Paus, the strategos of the Thebaid, who was also an Egyptian. Ptolemy Roman VIII and Cleopatra Roman III had returned from Cyprus to Egypt by the beginning of 130 BC. By spring, they were in charge of Memphis. Impressed by Paus's success against Harsesi, they promoted him to command over the whole of Upper Egypt and put him in charge of the whole military apparatus, the first time that a native Egyptian had held such a prominent position. Harsesi was finally captured and executed in September 130 BC. Alexandria was placed under siege, but Ptolemy Roman VIII and Cleopatra Roman III were unable to capture it. Cleopatra Roman II also maintained strongholds throughout the country. Harmonthes in the Thebaid was still under her control in October 130 BC. Cleopatra Roman II had planned to have her son Ptolemy Memphis, who was now 12 years old and residing in Cyrene, recalled to Alexandria and acclaimed as king. Ptolemy Roman VIII was able to get hold of the boy in 130 BC, killed him, and sent the dismembered pieces back to Cleopatra Roman II on her birthday. Both parties appealed to Rome, but the Senate did not intervene in the conflict. Growing desperate, in 129 BC Cleopatra Roman II offered the throne of Egypt to the Seleucid king Demetrius Roman II Nicator. He had just returned to power in the Seleucid realm after years in Parthian captivity, and was the husband of Cleopatra the daughter of Cleopatra Roman II and Ptolemy VI. Accordingly, Demetrius Roman II launched an invasion of Egypt in 128 BC. But his forces were still in the eastern desert, besieging the border fortress of Pelusium, when news arrived that Cleopatra the had installed their son, the future Antiochus Roman VIII, as king of Syria. The Seleucid troops mutinied, and Demetrius Roman II had to return to Syria. In order to prevent Demetrius from returning once he had dealt with these revolts, Ptolemy Roman VIII agreed to a request that he had received from a group of rebels in Syria, who had asked him to send them a royal pretender to lead them. Ptolemy selected Alexander Roman II Zebenes, whom he presented as the son of an earlier Seleucid king, Alexander I Balazar, 152–145 BC. The resulting conflict in the Seleucid realm continued for years, and meant that Seleucid intervention in opposition to Ptolemy Roman VIII was no longer possible. In 127 BC, Cleopatra Roman II took her treasury and fled Alexandria for the court of Demetrius Roman II. In her absence, Ptolemy Roman VIII finally reconquered Alexandria in 126 BC. This reconquest was accompanied by a bloody purge of the supporters of Cleopatra Roman II. It is difficult to tell whether various anecdotes recording the bloody slaughter that Ptolemy Roman VIII presided over belong to this event. Third reign 126–116 BC. After this, Ptolemy began negotiations to reconcile with Cleopatra Roman II and the Seleucid court. In 124 BC, Ptolemy Roman VIII abandoned his support for Alexander Roman II Zebenes and agreed to support Demetrius Roman II's son and successor, Antiochus Roman VIII Philometor, instead. He sealed the agreement by sending his second daughter by Cleopatra Roman III, Tryphina, to marry the Seleucid king. Cleopatra Roman II returned to Egypt from the Seleucid court and was once more acknowledged as co-regent with Ptolemy Roman VIII and Cleopatra Roman III. She appears along with them in papyrus documents from July 124 BC onwards. The reconciliation of Ptolemy Roman VIII and Cleopatra Roman III with Cleopatra Roman II was nevertheless a long process. To solidify their reconciliation and restore peace and prosperity to Egypt, the royal trio issued the amnesty decree in April 118 BC, which survives in a number of papyrus copies. This decree pardoned all crimes other than murder and temple robbing committed before 118 BC, encouraged refugees to return home and reclaim their property, waived all back taxes, confirmed land grants made to soldiers during the Civil War, affirmed temple land holdings and tax privileges, and instructed tax officials to use standardized weights and measures on pain of death. In addition, the decree established the jurisdiction of courts in legal disputes between Egyptians and Greeks. Henceforth, the crematistae were no longer allowed to drag Egyptians into their courts, as had apparently been occurring previously. Ptolemy Roman VIII died on 28 June 116 BC. He was succeeded by his eldest surviving son, Ptolemy Roman IX, alongside Cleopatra Roman II and Cleopatra Roman III. Justin reports that he left the throne to Cleopatra Roman III and whichever of her sons she preferred. Although she preferred her younger son, Ptolemy X, the people of Alexandria forced her to choose Ptolemy Roman IX. This account is probably a false one, invented after Ptolemy Roman IX was deposed by Ptolemy X. Regime. Ptolemaic dynastic cult. Ptolemaic Egypt had a dynastic cult which centered on the Ptolemaia festival and the annual priest of Alexander the Great, whose full title included the names of all the Ptolemaic ruling couples and appeared in official documents as part of the date formula. In October 170 BC, when Ptolemy Roman VIII first became co-regent with his brother and sister, who were already worshipped as the Theai Philometor's mother-loving gods, he was simply added to their cult as a third mother-loving god. When he seized sole power in 164 BC, he seems to have assumed the new epithet Euergetes, but it is not clear what the implications of this were for the dynastic cult. After his expulsion from Alexandria in 163 BC, the Theai Philometors are attested once more. At the start of Ptolemy Roman VIII's second reign in 145 BC, he was definitely incorporated into the dynastic cult, with him and Cleopatra Roman II becoming the Theai Euergétēs Benefactor gods. Cleopatra Roman III was added as a third benefactor god in 142 or 141 BC, sometime before she married Ptolemy Roman VIII and was promoted to the status of co-regent. During the period of the Civil War, Cleopatra Roman II removed the Theai Euergétēs from the dynastic cult in Alexandria, but Ptolemy Roman VIII and Cleopatra Roman III maintained their own rival priest of Alexander from 130 BC until they recovered Alexandria in 127 BC. He is distinguished in documents as the priest of Alexander. In the king's camp, the situation before the Civil War was restored in 124 BC after the reconciliation of the siblings, and it continued until Ptolemy Roman VIII's death. From May 118 BC, shortly after the final reconciliation of the royal trio, a new king was incorporated into the dynastic cult. This appears to have been a posthumous cult for one of the princes killed by Ptolemy Roman VIII, either Ptolemy Eupator, son of Ptolemy VI, and Cleopatra Roman II, or Ptolemy Memphites, son of Ptolemy Roman VIII and Cleopatra Roman II. Ptolemy Memphites is generally the preferred candidate, with the deification serving as an indication that the prince had posthumously reconciled with his father and murderer. Since the death of Arsinoe Roman II, Deceased Ptolemaic queens had been honored with a separate dynastic cult of their own, including a separate priestess who marched in religious processions in Alexandria behind the priest of Alexander the Great, and whose names also appeared in dating formulae. In 131 or 130 BC, Ptolemy VIII and Cleopatra III took advantage of this tradition in their conflict against Cleopatra II by establishing a new priesthood in honor of Cleopatra III. This new position was called the Hieros Polos, sacred foal of Isis, great mother of the gods, and was placed immediately after the priest of Alexander and ahead of all the priestesses of the previous queens in the order of precedence. The position was unlike the previous priesthoods in that it was established for a living queen rather than a deceased one, and because the holder was a priest rather than a priestess. The position is not attested after 105 BC. Pharaonic ideology and traditional Egyptian religion. From the beginning of the Ptolemaic dynasty, the Ptolemies had taken on the traditional role of the Egyptian pharaoh and pursued a symbiotic alliance with the Egyptian priestly elite. The degree of investment of the Ptolemies in this aspect of their rulership steadily increased over the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. Ptolemy VIII nevertheless represents a new stage in this process, since in the conflict with Cleopatra II, he proved more popular among the Egyptians as their pharaoh than among the Greeks as their king. In the amnesty decree that announced the reconciliation of Ptolemy VIII, Cleopatra III, and Cleopatra II in 118 BC, the royal trio undertook to support reconstruction and repair work at temples throughout Egypt. They also promised to pay for the mummification and entombment of the Apis and Nevis bulls. Alexandrian scholarship. Ptolemy VIII was an active participant in Greek scholarship, especially philology. He is reported to have written a study of Homer at some point before 145 BC and 24 books of hyponemata notes, a miscellaneous collection of paradoxography, including stories about historical and contemporary monarchs, as well as exotic wildlife and other topics. The surviving fragments are collected in Felix Jacobi's fragment Der Griechischen Historiker. Despite this interest, Ptolemy's reign saw a serious decline in the importance of Alexandria as an intellectual center, in part due to the massacres that he carried out on taking control of the city in 145 BC and again in 126 BC. Among his victims on the first occasion were a number of prominent intellectuals, including Aristarchus of Samothrace and Apollodorus of Athens. The rest of the Alexandrian intellectuals appear to have been sent into exile, mostly relocating to Athens or Rhodes. Indian Ocean trade. The Ptolemies had long retained a network of trading stations throughout the Red Sea, which enabled them to acquire gold, ivory, and elephants from the Horn of Africa. In the very last years of Ptolemy VIII's reign, these sailors discovered that the annual reversal of the Indian monsoon current made it possible to cross the Indian Ocean by sea in summer and then return in winter. The first Greek to make this journey was Eudoxus of Cyzicus, who is reported to have traveled to India in 118 BC and again in 116 BC. The discovery opened up the possibility of direct seaborne trade with India. Previously, trade between the Mediterranean region and India had relied on intermediary sailors from the Arabian centers in the Gulf of Aden and the Persian Gulf, and then desert caravans led by the Nabateans to carry goods across the Arabian desert to the Mediterranean coast. Henceforth, sailors from Ptolemaic Egypt began to make the full journey themselves. This marks the beginning of the Indian Ocean trade, which would become a major part of the Eurasian economic world system that operated from the 1st century BC until the 4th century AD. Marriage and issue. Ptolemy VIII Euergetes married his older sister, Cleopatra II, on his accession in 145 BC, and she bore him one son. In 142 or 141 BC, Ptolemy also married his niece, Cleopatra Roman III, daughter of Ptolemy VI and Cleopatra Roman II. They had a number of children. By a concubine, perhaps Irene, Ptolemy had further issue. Ancestry.